For those of you who've been following the travel book for a while, you might remember that about a year ago we were traveling around in Asia, our first big adventure, exploring the big southeastern part of the world. Beautiful adventures, but very suddenly on a night of New Year's Eve in Ho Chi Minh City, things took a bit of a twist and turn, and we had to fly back to Denmark the next morning because I had a panic anxiety attack on this rooftop bar. And it was something that put my life and things in perspective and made a drastic turn of how I've been thinking ever since. But bottom line is, we went back to Denmark, and I went into therapy for about 10 weeks, had some great counseling and help, and tried to learn how to live with this new diagnosis that I have, the anxiety. And I know that all cases of anxiety is very different. We all cope with it very differently. My situation is that I have anxiety for getting anxiety panic attacks, which is well, double ironic. I know that it's all up inside of my own head. It's all about my own worries and how that can affect the whole way of me thinking, but also feeling. And yeah, why am I mentioning this now? Because we're all in a very strange situation with the coronavirus, and I know that it's affecting everyone, both mentally, but also when it comes to financial situation and anything else. But for a person like me who is suffering from anxiety, this is a very difficult situation. It's difficult because normally in my position, I know it's a worry only inside of my own head. I can turn off everything around me, and I can try to deal with it. I can try to be distracted from something else. But I have written a blog post about my situation in Vietnam, how it was traveling with anxiety back then. And I have written that in this article that I've also linked below. So you can read this blog post if you're interested to see my first thoughts about this. Right now, a year later, after my therapy, I thought I was dealing quite well and coping with how things were happening. But it didn't take me long before I could see that I was very much affected by everything, because I couldn't just turn this off, because suddenly it wasn't just my own issues. It was not just my worries inside of my head. It was something that affected everyone. So it was friends, it was family, it was people who was watching our channels, it was partnerships, it was even the internet distributor back in Denmark sending emails about the virus. So for me, it was a situation that I just couldn't, let's say, put on pause. I couldn't just turn this off, and because it was simply everywhere. And I know that it's affecting everyone in either way, but the reason I'm saying this is because for me, it has been impossible to turn off for everything. But I could have done better looking back just within the last week. The news, every time you open up for the news, the only thing you see is about the virus. So you're immediately into this whole thing, worrying about what's going to happen next. And the fact is, no one knows. And we have no idea how things is going to look within a month or within half a year. We can only guess about this. So my daily routines has not been waking up, drinking my morning coffee and turning on the news. I know that if something very drastically needs to happen, I will get informed by either my parents or good friends who will inform me. But so far I've decided to turn off all kind of news because it's simply just affecting me in a negative way. We were in Spain, we were staying up in this incredible house on the top of the mountain. There were no people around us. There were a grocery store down in a small village. We had food enough for several weeks because we didn't go shopping that often. And we could easily have lived up there for several weeks without being provocative by everything around us. When the government said that now it's time for everyone to go home, we were reading about this in the Danish news before we even got something from the Danish government. And the thing is, all news, of course, try to get some attention. They are living off people these days, refreshing their website every 5th second to see what else has happened, how many people is infected. But the thing is, every kind of details were twisted in some way. There was no clear way of saying, this is how you're going to behave, this is what you should do, this is how you should get back to Denmark, or do you even have to go back to Denmark? At some stage we had to tell you guys on our Instagram profile to please not interact with us right now. And looking back, we were overreacting a bit. We could have said it in a nicer way, so we apologize for that. It was a very, let's say, critical situation, because the worst thing for us that could happen was, well, of course, that we could get, in some way affected by this, but in that situation, we're staying up in the mountains. We have about 3,500 kilometers back to Copenhagen, and if I start to panic and would get a panic attack, it wouldn't kill me, but it would be very difficult for Caroline to be able to handle the situation and have a straight and clear thinking mind. Since we are up in the mountains, it's very difficult to get an ambulance to Casa Pedro, where we lived, since it is located in a very solitary space up in the mountains. So it was very important for us that I could try to think clear, to control my anxiety and not go into a panic attack. So we apologize that we told you guys not to interact with us at that certain moment, because we received tons of messages with good advice of, well, now it's the time to go home and you have to pack up your things. They're closing up the borders. You have about 2 hours before you have to be out of the country. Everything is shut down. And at that situation, when you're far away from home, it is a critical situation. I think it's important that we can all think separately, and at that current time it was not possible for us. But yeah, so my point is, these days I would advise, for those of you who are feeling the same way as I do, who is easier to get worried about, well, the unknown, about the critical situation that could happen, and all these kind of worries, turn off the news, because currently they are not helping in any way. I promise you that if something should go either real good or real bad, you will be informed. So yeah, positive vibes from me. I could feel as soon as we crossed the Danish border that my mental state of mind was a lot easier. I'm not sure if that's a way to put it, but it was a lot easier for me to be me and to have my worries when I'm back home. I think that's for many people the thing, that we have our own safe space. And obviously my apartment with Caroline here in Copenhagen is my little safe space. So being back here, even though the situation is no different in Denmark, I feel more safe in some way. Anxiety is something that I have to live with for the rest of my life. And when I started living as we do now, I was kind of skeptical that I could continue with that lifestyle with anxiety, because it obviously can affect you very easily. This has been a year where I'm dealing with it on every travel we're at, but I'm trying not to make it something that affects the trip, because I know that, well, it's all up in my head, and nothing bad is going to happen. So I'm going to continue trying to, well, stay positive, but also to make sure that I live with the anxiety, that I'm still every day, for me, it is a task of challenging the anxiety. In the past, I could sometimes easily skip away from things when it became let's say, something I was uncomfortable with. I've always been afraid of heights. But since I've been diagnosed with the anxiety, I've always tried to challenge myself since that day and said, well, it's all up in your head. So challenge those things. And yeah, we went to Sweden, where when climbing off these rocks, I would never have been able to do that 2 years ago, because I simply had just a block inside of my head. So try to turn the negative part of this into something which gives you encouragement and which is motivating you to do something. I had a time where I thought it would not be possible for me to travel again, and sometimes I can still get that feeling, but every time you conquer something new, it gives you the strength and motivation to continue. So yeah, start slowly, take a few days trip somewhere, of course when this is all over. But if you are in a situation where you feel this is an ongoing story, you won't be able to travel because you're getting out of your little safe space, I'll say, well, put that thought on pause and do smaller trips. Try staying out somewhere, just for a night maybe. Have a success experience with this and come back later and try something else. For the rest of our lives, we're going to live with this, and start putting up different barriers that will compromise your different experiences is something that you're only going to regret later on. And I promise you, I know how tricky that is to just stay positive and try to look ahead of this, but in the end it's worth it. And all the adventures we've had without the last year is something I'll definitely not regret, even though I've had nights and lots of walks with different thoughts inside of my head. Overall, it's always worth it, and I'm very motivated to start planning our next few trips and making sure that we will continue this. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I hope that for those of you who might have anxiety or some thoughts, if there's something you want to ask or if there's any questions, feel free to send us an email or interact with us in any kind of way. We're always here to support and share of our knowledge within this. And yeah, stay positive and safe out there. Have a good one.